Katri Reicher is a researcher in the study of religions at the University of Fribourg, whose work focuses on contemporary alternative, vernacular, and countercultural spiritualities, particularly as expressed in European rainbow gatherings. Her scholarship is grounded in long-term ethnographic fieldwork and examines the gatherings' self-organized social structures, participatory ritual practices, ecological and nature-sacralizing orientations, and the broader cultural values that animate these temporary intentional communities. She analyzes how participants negotiate authority, identity, and communal belonging through experiential, anti-institutional, and holistic frameworks, and her recent work also engages with the dynamics of conspiratorial spiritual overlap within alternative spiritual networks. Her publications include research on material culture, rituality, and political models within rainbow gatherings, along with her monograph Alternative Spirituality, Counterculture, and European Rainbow Gatherings, Pachamama, I'm Coming Home. This 2023 paper, New Age Gathering in a Pandemic, European Rainbow Gathering 2021 in France, explains what happened when thousands of people from the Rainbow Family, a countercultural spiritual community that holds large camping gatherings focused on peace, nature, and alternative spirituality, met in France during the COVID-19 pandemic. It describes how the group struggled to find a place to hold the event because of health restrictions, how they ultimately occupied land without permission, and how police and local officials reacted but did not shut the gathering down. Once the event began, most participants ignored pandemic rules like masking or distancing, and many distrusted government health advice, favoring natural healing or conspiracy-style explanations about the virus and vaccines. The author uses this event to show how alternative spiritual communities often combine holistic spirituality with suspicion of mainstream institutions, and how that mix can fuel strong reactions to government health measures. The study also notes that, despite widely shared skepticism, not everyone at the gathering held the same views, and internal tensions emerged over vaccinations, authority, and personal freedom. The paper opens by explaining what rainbow gatherings are: large, temporary, communal camps held in nature where people live together without money, share food and responsibilities, and practice a mix of alternative spirituality, peace activism, and countercultural values. These gatherings reject formal leadership, emphasize personal freedom, and create a kind of short-term community centered on nature, harmony, and collective ritual. For many participants, attending these events is not just social but also a meaningful spiritual experience. The introduction then describes how the COVID-19 pandemic collided with this type of community. Public health restrictions directly limited travel, gathering, and communal living, activities that are central to rainbow culture. At the same time, people involved in alternative or holistic spirituality often already distrust government institutions and mainstream medicine, making pandemic rules especially controversial among them. As a result, the pandemic highlighted deeper differences between how mainstream society and these communities understand health, authority, and personal freedom. To make sense of the reactions observed at the gatherings, the author introduces the idea of conspirituality, a mix of New Age spirituality and conspiracy-style thinking. This concept helps explain why some participants believed the virus was exaggerated, rejected vaccines, or viewed restrictions as attempts at control. Rather than treating these views as strict beliefs, conspirituality is presented as a cultural style, a way of interpreting the world that blends spiritual intuition with suspicion of official power. This framework sets up the rest of the paper, which explores how these attitudes appeared during the 2021 European Rainbow Gathering. Rainbow gatherings began in 1972 during the height of the counterculture movement, when activists, peace advocates, and people seeking alternative ways of living wanted to create a space outside mainstream society. The idea was to form temporary communities in nature where people could live simply, freely, and cooperatively. These early gatherings set the tone for what the movement would later become: a blend of utopian ideas, spiritual experimentation, and social protest. A defining trait of rainbow gatherings is that they have no formal leaders or organizational structure. Everything is run by volunteers, and decisions are made collectively. Money is not used inside the gatherings, with food, labor, and supplies shared freely among participants. People camp in natural settings, cook communal meals, and take part in rituals such as chanting, meditation, or forming large circles. The overall atmosphere emphasizes living close to nature, valuing peace, and exploring spirituality without formal religious institutions. The Rainbow Family, as participants often call themselves, is not an official group, but a loose worldwide network of people who show up at these events. Anyone who attends is considered part of the family, and people come from many countries, age groups, and backgrounds. Because there is no membership list or leadership, each gathering looks different depending on who shows up, and the culture shifts and adapts as new people bring new ideas and practices. Underlying the rainbow culture is a shared set of values that often stands in contrast to mainstream society, which participants refer to as Babylon. This term symbolizes everything they see as oppressive, materialistic, or disconnected from nature. In response, rainbow communities promote natural living, alternative healing, and an egalitarian ethos where everyone is treated as equal. These gatherings function as a temporary escape from ordinary social pressures and as a living example of how a more open, cooperative, and spiritually connected community might look. The paper explains that many people involved in rainbow gatherings come from countercultural backgrounds where there is a deep and long-standing mistrust of governments, large institutions, and mainstream experts. This skepticism didn't begin with the pandemic. It has been part of the movement since its early days, shaped by anti-establishment ideas and dissatisfaction with how modern societies operate. As a result, state rules and official health guidelines are often viewed with suspicion or seen as tools of control rather than public protection. Within this worldview, natural healing is viewed as more authentic and trustworthy than medical science. Participants often rely on personal intuition, lived experience, herbal remedies, or spiritual practices instead of doctors, vaccines, or scientific studies. This emphasis on nature and self-guided decision-making leads many to believe that the body can heal itself, or that natural immunity is better than medical intervention. For them, intuition or inner truth can carry more weight than scientific evidence. Because these beliefs were already strongly rooted in the rainbow culture, they shaped how people reacted when COVID-19 restrictions and vaccines appeared. Measures such as lockdowns, travel rules, and vaccination programs were seen not just as health policies, but as threats to personal freedom and bodily autonomy. Many participants were predisposed to question whether the pandemic was as dangerous as authorities claimed, whether vaccines were safe, or whether governments had hidden motives. This existing mindset created fertile ground for skepticism, resistance, and alternative explanations during the pandemic. During 2020 to 2021, European countries put strict COVID-19 measures in place, including lockdowns, limits on public gatherings, closed borders, and vaccine certificate requirements for travel and events. These rules made it difficult for people to move freely between countries and nearly impossible to legally organize large in-person gatherings. For communities that rely on open movement and communal living, like the Rainbow Family, these restrictions directly challenged the activities that define their culture. Because rainbow gatherings depend on people camping together for weeks at a time, the bans on large events hit them especially hard. Many gatherings were cancelled or pushed underground. Some groups held events secretly in remote areas, while others openly ignored the rules and gathered anyway. These events often operated off the radar, spread by word of mouth or private channels, because announcing them publicly risked attracting police attention and shutdowns. As a result, the usual openness of rainbow communication shifted into more cautious, fragmented networks. The fear of government intervention made planning even the 2021 European gathering extremely difficult. Organizers struggled to find places willing to host them, and attempts to occupy land were sometimes disrupted by authorities. Because advertising locations online could lead officials straight to the site, information was often withheld, coded, or shared at the last moment. This atmosphere of secrecy and uncertainty shaped the conditions of the author's fieldwork, and showed how the pandemic forced the community to adapt its normally open, free-flowing organization to a climate of surveillance and restriction. The author describes how organizing the 2021 European Rainbow Gathering was unusually difficult, with multiple attempts to secure a site shut down by police before participants finally occupied a remote location in Majanes, France. Even after the gathering began, people reported mixed experiences with law enforcement, including officers blocking roads, checking IDs, or trying to reduce attendance, while others entered without encountering any controls. Despite pandemic restrictions, around 4,000 people eventually gathered, and life at the site looked much like past events. No masks, no distancing, little added sanitation, and plenty of hugging, rituals, and communal activities. Throughout the gathering, participants received confusing and often contradictory messages about its legal status, with some hearing that forest authorities had granted permission and others seeing notices banning the event, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and rumor. The organizers of the 2021 European Rainbow Gathering had a difficult time finding a place to hold the event because many landowners refused permission and the police repeatedly intervened. Each time participants tried to set up camp, authorities showed up quickly, forcing them to move before the gathering could take shape. This created a tense, stop-and-start process in which organizers had to keep searching for a site while avoiding detection long enough to establish a stable camp. Eventually, the group shifted to a covert strategy. Instead of seeking approval, participants quietly occupied a remote area near Majanes in the French Pyrenees, hoping that the isolation would delay or prevent official intervention. Once enough people arrived and the camp became large and established, it became harder for authorities to remove them without causing a major confrontation, which helped the gathering remain in place. Even after the camp was set up, reports about police activity varied widely. Some participants said officers were blocking roads leading to the gathering, checking identification, or telling people to leave. Others reported walking in freely without seeing any police at all. This inconsistency created confusion among attendees and highlighted the uneasy relationship between the gathering and local authorities throughout the event. Despite the pandemic and the difficulty of organizing the event, the gathering drew a surprisingly large crowd, reaching around 4,000 people at its peak. This showed how strong the desire was among participants to reconnect with the rainbow community after long periods of isolation and restrictions. The high turnout also reflected how determined many were to keep the tradition alive despite official limits on travel and large events. Once inside the camp, daily life looked almost identical to gatherings before COVID-19. People did not wear masks, keep physical distance, or add new hygiene routines beyond the usual hand-washing stations that rainbow events typically maintain. The community prioritized closeness, shared living, and a sense of togetherness, even though these choices conflicted with mainstream public health advice at the time. Rituals and social interactions continued without modification. Participants held hands in large circles, hugged freely, shared food, and gathered around the main fire as they always had. Communal singing, dancing, and spiritual activities remained central to the experience. To many attendees, these practices were essential to the gathering's purpose, and preserving them felt more important than adapting to pandemic rules. There was a lot of confusion among participants about whether the gathering was legally allowed to take place. Some people claimed that local forest officials had visited the site and granted permission for the event to continue as long as it stayed below a certain size. At the same time, others reported seeing official notices stating that the gathering was banned entirely, and that anyone remaining in the area could face legal consequences. These mixed signals made it difficult for attendees to understand the real situation. Inside the community, rumors spread quickly and often contradicted one another. Messages circulated through word of mouth and informal channels, with no clear or central source of reliable information. As a result, people formed very different impressions of what the authorities intended, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty where no one was fully sure what was true and what was speculation. Many people at the gathering strongly distrusted government health policies, medical experts, and the vaccine rollout. This skepticism wasn't new. It fit into long-standing countercultural beliefs that official institutions often hide information, act in their own interests, or misuse power. For many participants, COVID-19 rules felt like another example of authorities overstepping their boundaries and restricting personal freedom. Within this climate of mistrust, several conspiracy-style ideas were common. Some believed the virus was created in a lab, or that its dangers were exaggerated to justify tighter control over citizens. Others claimed that vaccines contained harmful ingredients, were developed mainly for corporate profit, or could be used as tools of surveillance or manipulation. These ideas spread easily because they aligned with pre-existing beliefs about hidden agendas and skepticism toward mainstream science. A recurring fear among participants was that authorities were inflating case numbers, hospitalizations, or deaths to maintain public fear and compliance. For those who accepted this narrative, official statistics were seen not as neutral data but as politicized tools designed to justify restrictions. This contributed to a broader sense that governments were not being honest, which further fueled refusal to follow rules like masking, distancing, or vaccination. The desire for bodily autonomy and unrestricted movement was especially strong. Many participants felt that decisions about health should be entirely personal, without state interference. Some took this idea so far that they considered intentionally catching COVID-19 to gain natural immunity. Because some countries accepted proof of recovery as an alternative to vaccination, a few individuals viewed deliberate infection as a path to travel and participate in society without accepting vaccines they did not trust. These attitudes created noticeable tension within the gathering. While most participants opposed vaccination, a minority had chosen to get vaccinated and preferred not to discuss it openly. Some vaccinated members worried about being judged or excluded, while unvaccinated participants questioned their choices or saw them as giving in to government pressure. This divide revealed how the pandemic introduced new fault lines even within a community that prides itself on unity, openness, and acceptance of different beliefs. The paper uses the term conspirituality to describe a blend of New Age spirituality and conspiracy-style thinking. This fusion combines ideas about hidden knowledge, intuition, and spiritual awakening with suspicions about governments, elites, and institutional power. Instead of treating conspiracy theories and alternative spirituality as separate worlds, conspirituality shows how they can reinforce each other, creating a shared worldview where personal intuition feels more trustworthy than official information. This mindset fits easily within rainbow culture, which already values non-mainstream beliefs, personal freedom, and distrust of authorities. Participants often frame their lives in spiritual or nature-based terms while also questioning the motives of governments, scientists, or corporations. Because the community sees itself as outside Babylon, the mainstream world, it naturally gravitates toward explanations that challenge official narratives and emphasize hidden forces or deeper truths. The analysis stresses that conspirituality is not mainly about whether people literally believe every conspiracy claim. Instead, it is shaped by emotions, aesthetics, and experiences, how stories feel true, how they resonate with personal intuition, and how they symbolically express shared concerns. This makes conspirituality more like a cultural style or way of sensing the world rather than a fixed set of factual beliefs. The author describes the rainbow family as a community of sense, meaning a group held together by shared feelings and ways of interpreting reality rather than by formal doctrines or consistent rules. People in this community may not agree on details, but they share a general orientation, skepticism toward authority, valuing nature and intuition, and believing in personal spiritual insight. This shared sensibility makes conspirituality a natural fit within the gathering, providing a common language for expressing both spiritual identity and political dissent. After the gathering ended, reports began circulating that COVID-19 had spread among attendees, with dozens of people confirming infections through testing. Because not everyone who fell ill reported their status, the real number was likely higher. These reports showed that, despite participants' belief that the gathering was safe or spiritually protected, the virus had in fact moved through the camp. Reactions within the rainbow community varied widely. Some participants were not worried and treated their illness as mild or inevitable, while others expressed serious concern about the symptoms or the possibility that they had unknowingly spread the virus to others. This mix of reactions highlighted the differing levels of risk tolerance and belief within the group, especially between those who dismissed COVID-19 as overblown and those who felt regret or anxiety after falling sick. Local residents, however, reacted much more negatively. Some joined online discussions to voice frustration that the gathering had brought COVID-19 into their region, arguing that participants acted irresponsibly by holding a large event during a pandemic. Their anger reflected a broader tension between the Rainbow family's desire for freedom and communal living, and the surrounding community's concerns about public health and safety. The conclusion explains that the pandemic intensified long-standing friction between the Rainbow family's countercultural, spiritually oriented way of life, and the authority of the modern state. Restrictions on travel, gathering, and vaccination were interpreted through an existing framework of skepticism towards institutions, making COVID-19 policies feel like direct challenges to the community's core values of freedom and self-determination. This tension was not new but became far more visible as public health rules collided with deeply rooted countercultural ideals. The author emphasizes that conspirituality functioned more as a cultural lens than a rigid belief system. Rather than relying on literal acceptance of conspiracy theories, participants used conspiratorial narratives to express distrust, emotional concerns, and alternative interpretations of world events. These narratives operated symbolically, helping people make sense of the crisis in ways that aligned with their spiritual identities, even when the details of the theories varied from person to person. Throughout the pandemic, Rainbow gatherings continued to prioritize autonomy, communal living, and a return to nature ethic. Even in the face of public health warnings, participants focused on closeness, ritual, and shared experience, presenting the gathering as a healing space rather than a risk. This reflected their broader worldview, which places natural living, personal intuition, and spiritual connection above institutional guidance or external regulation. At the same time, the community was not unified in its response. While many participants adopted skeptical or conspiratorial interpretations of COVID-19, others followed mainstream medical advice, supported vaccination, or expressed concern about the virus. The range of reactions demonstrated that the Rainbow family is not monolithic. It contains diverse viewpoints, even if the dominant culture of the gatherings tends to amplify certain attitudes more strongly than others. The author arrives late in the process, when the cat-and-mouse game with the police has already pushed the gathering into a remote valley above Majanes in the Pyrenees. The paved road ends in improvised parking areas where cars and vans cluster along the mountain track. People talk about checkpoints that were there earlier in the day, officers turning some vehicles back, taking IDs, warning people not to go up. Others say they came through another way and saw no police at all. From the parking, the path climbs into the forest. As I walk in, more and more side trails appear, evidence of people finding alternative routes to avoid controls. Eventually the trees open onto a broad meadow where the camp spreads out in all directions. Tents, tarps, kitchens, and fire circles forming a temporary village in the grass. Near the entry is Welcome Home, a loose cluster of tarps, a fire, and a notice board where new arrivals are greeted and given basic information. Someone mentions there is a legal paper from the authorities posted there, but when I ask to see it, a person busy cooking just waves vaguely toward the board, unconcerned. Somewhere among the flyers and notes is an official document declaring that the Rainbow Family Movement gathering is prohibited in the department until the end of August. Elsewhere, people repeat a different story, that forest or fire authorities have agreed the gathering can stay if numbers remain below a certain threshold. The contradictions are not resolved. Rumor and partial information circulate as easily as people do, and most participants move on to find their place in the camp rather than trying to clarify the legal status. Life in the main area feels very close to pre-pandemic gatherings. At the center, the main circle and main fire form the social and ritual hub. People sit in concentric rings on the ground for the food circle, hands joined during the blessing before collective meals, then passing pots and plates along. Children weave through the crowd, dogs sleep by their owners, smoke drifts from the kitchens at the edges. There are hand-washing stations near the kitchens and latrines, but no masks, no distancing, no visible signs that this is taking place in the middle of a global health crisis. Participants hug, kiss, clasp hands, and crowd shoulder to shoulder around the fire at night. Someone comments that the vibe at main fire at night is like the full moon every evening, a way of saying that the level of energy and participation feels unusually high, as if the long absence of gatherings has built up a strong demand for this kind of communal space. The nights around the full moon are dense with music, drumming, chanting, and conversation. The main fire becomes a focus where strangers and old friends share songs and stories, and where spiritual practices blend with simple socializing. At the same time, talk about COVID, restrictions, and vaccines threads through private conversations in tents and around smaller fires. Some speak of the gathering as necessary healing, something they felt they could not postpone despite regulations. Others mention sick people in the camp or rumors of participants visiting infected friends in order to gain natural immunity and the certificates that would allow them to travel. On the full moon itself, a helicopter circles above the main meadow, briefly breaking into the collective ritual below, and reminding everyone that the wider world, with its laws and its concerns about contagion, is still watching this improvised, fragile, and intensely lived community in the mountains.